It's time to take a ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive with our co-hosts, Saunders and Zachary Smith.
Welcome into another Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is Saunders. Do not adjust those screens. Chris Carter is back in the fold, joining the show. I'll give him shotgun. So I'm actually sitting in the back seat. I can't say sitting in the back. Riding shotgun for this episode. Chris Carter, how we doing, pal?
I'm doing great, fellas. Glad to be back on the show. It's glad to be with my homies over here on the Afternoon Drive. It's always fun being here.
I'm here to be the middleman. I'm going to make sure that nobody gets verbally accosted on this episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I won't let it happen on my watch.
What's so funny too is like I was so out of it that day. Like I didn't like when everyone was like, "Did you see what happened between Ian Rappaport and Jordan Schultz?" And I was like, "What? Who?" I was just like, "How did this happen?" And then Alan is cussing me out in Prime 47 in Indianapolis, and I'm like, "Hi, Alan." And I didn't think twice about it. I was just like, "Yeah, that's Alan. He's yelling at me. It's fine."
Perfect. Let's just jump right into it, guys. A name that we expected to be on the Steelers' radar when free agency hit was Christian Kirk, because we were under the assumption that he was going to be released by the Jacksonville Jaguars. However, before being released, he was actually traded to the Houston Texans for a 2026 7th-round pick. I see a lot of Steelers fans kind of like going nuts over this. Just I think because it's a name that they were so familiar with going back to last year at the trade deadline. Very well could be a Pittsburgh Steeler right now if he didn't break his collarbone last year. But is this a move that we should be up in arms about the Steelers not making, giving up a 2026 7th-round pick if that's all it was going to take to cost to get him? Or is this more about them not wanting to acquire the contract that he's currently on? What do we make of this?
Well, I mean, I was talking to a Steelers source today, and I think the quote was, "Everything is waiting on quarterback." So I don't know that the Steelers were in a position to feel like they were ready to make this deal. I wrote this morning, SteelersNow.com, that like they had time on their side. Like the fans are always impatient, and that's usually not the right thing to be, right? Usually the idea is like the options don't, let the leverage play out. Like see if you can get a better deal. And like right now, I'm like, the thing is, like, the free agency wide receiver has already started. Devontae Adams was cut. There was Christian Kirk was available. Deebo Samuel was traded. Tyler Lockett's been cut. So like all those guys, those talks can be happening right now. The Steelers have to figure out what they're doing at quarterback because they had an interest in Christian Kirk last year in acquiring this very contract that you are now wondering whether they had interest in acquiring. So we know they had interest in acquiring it because they almost did it last year at the deadline. They probably would have if he hadn't got a broken collarbone. So yeah, I think this is a move they would have made, and maybe you can say should have made. I guess we can wait and see what they end up doing instead.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see what happened here. I think this is one of those things that, like, when this was nationally reported, like, oh yeah, he's being cut, like it's a done deal, don't worry about it. And I think the Steelers were like, all right, he's getting cut, we can just get him in free agency, that'll be fine. And the Texans just beat him to it. I think it's really interesting that the Jaguars are sending him to a division rival. It's like that's a choice, But yeah, I think that if you're the Steelers and you like it makes me wonder if like they knew that this was an option on the table, or if they thought that they were just like, yeah, you know what, he's going to hit free agency and then we'll have a full gamut of options. Because for all we know, there is a smorgasbord of options that they're like, okay, we're going to weigh what we want to get, and there's other priorities. And maybe what it is that Christian Kirk is not a priority. Like Alan said, quarterback is something they have to decide on. But you know what? I bet that quarterback, is the top thing. Wide receiver might not be the top thing. They might be thinking our priority is to get one of these top line corners. They want to get Charvarius Ward. They want to get one of those guys. And then like once they figure out the money for these other things is when they start making sure like, hey, this is the type of receiver you want to lock up. And I'm not making excuses for not going and getting this guy right now. I'm just speculating if that's the way they're thinking. I get it, but I'm with Alan on this. Like, another team jumped on this and now has a guy who could be a legit wide receiver too for them. And as I said on my Locked On Steelers Thursday episode, to me, with the two guys that were being talked about coming off of Wednesday, Christian Kirk to be released, DK Metcalf to be traded. if you trade for Metcalf, in my opinion, that is a flipping of the room, and that probably means that George Pickens might be on the way out because he's getting you're bringing in that guy to be your big money wide receiver, and then you're going to send out George to get some compensation in return for that and to balance that out some way. But if you get Christian Kirk, he's legitimately your number 2 wide receiver, and that's just what you're working with. You keep George in the fold at least for now, and you figure out, maybe you draft a receiver high this year if you want to, further buttress that, but. I do think that there's a misstep here unless there's some other part of the plan that we just aren't seeing yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's other options out there. Like, it's not like it's the end of the world. I mean, they can sign Darius Slayton, and I don't think he's that different than Christian Kirk. Like, it's pretty much the same guy, but this was just such an easy deal to make. It seems like throwing not even this year's 7th round pick, and next year's 7th round pick. Like,
yeah, it's literally nothing.
It's basically like almost the.
Well, that's why I asked about like if they didn't want to acquire the contract he was on. I guess you could say like they could have obviously worked that out with him after acquiring him or whatever, but I was wondering if that was part of it in your mind.
I don't think so. I think that it wouldn't be because like Alan said, if they were going to acquire him before the contract obviously wasn't that big of a deal. And even if it was, he's on the last year of his deal, right? And like if they get him, they're most likely only getting the parts of his contract that aren't guaranteed. Because I doubt that the Jaguars are going to try to stick that, to make that a big part of the deal because he's not. They're trying to give him away. That's what they're doing right now. So if anything, I think that what would have happened there was they would have took his contract. They said, hey, this is the money that you were signed on with them. We're going to give you a 2-year extension, spread a little bit of this out, and then give you some money here and there. And that's how it's going to work. I think that's kind of what happened. What should have happened here if the Steelers were to go and trade for this for this guy. But again, Christian Kirk was the name that made sense because of the history as far as the Steelers wanting him, and he's another name out there. And look, there's a lot of other names still out there for the Steelers to go get. It's why I have the Mr. Krabs meme, because there's just always another guy and always another day. But certainly, this looks like a missed opportunity for the Steelers. It'll just depend on who they get, because if they end up with, I don't know, like if they end up with Devontae Adams and George Pickens as their guys, and then they draft like Jaden Higgins, then everyone's like, well, okay, maybe Christian Kirk wasn't the move there. But there's a lot to play out right here. But right now it's like, okay, yeah, the Texans jumped on this while everyone else was sleeping on the idea that Christian Kirk was just going to hit free agency. You know where they're going to pivot to after this? Don't you dare.
Brandon Ayuk.
I don't you.
There was that Tim Kawakami covers the 49ers said, and San Francisco Standard, I think they never felt good about $30 million a year. I think they were ready to trade him multiple times last year.
So why did they end up doing this? Why did they end up doing it?
The Steelers bullied them into the contract, and now they're having buyer's remorse.
Unbelievable.
So if I'm the Steelers, why do I want that bullied contract?
Because they got nobody else.
I'm sorry. I'm just not sold on Brandon Ayuk as this top 5 receiver that everyone's sworn he is for the past 2 years. Like, you got to go get him. He's the only option out there. He's a superstar waiting to happen. I don't buy it.
I'd rather have him than Metcalf.
And
Metcalf's going to want the same contract.
Let's talk about Metcalf, actually, because Stephen 116th actually asked us a question. Alan, you answered part of it. The second part you didn't get to, and he gives us a super chat. So, of course, we got to get his question on here. I'll start with Chris, though, for this one. Coming back to the DK Metcalf conversation, he asked what our thoughts would be. You mentioned George Pickens and pairing the two together. What about a one-for-one swap if that's what it took to acquire DK Metcalf?
My thing with that would be it would make sense if it didn't cost you draft capital, because I think the biggest concern with George Pickens is his off the field stuff and his attitude and what he means to the locker room. And there's questions about that. DK Metcalf comes to the Steelers. He can be a different tone. And look, they need to pay a wide receiver at some point, whether it's George Pickens, whether it's someone that they trade for, whether it's someone they sign in free agency, they need to have a number 1 wide receiver lined up soon. And George Pickens was in line to be the guy who gets that money. Whether or not he gets it, that's still up to the Steelers and him. But if you're the Steelers, and there's a lot of people who think the Steelers should not sign him to a long-term deal, that would be a way of passing the buck on it. So, hey, you know what?
Right.
Go deal with that in Seattle. Seattle, if you want to sign him long-term, have at it. We're going to get DK Metcalf. He'll be the number 1 wide receiver for now. at that stage, I'd still be prioritizing drafting a guy and signing another guy. But because you're basically putting yourself in the same situation, just with a guy with, more experience. But yeah, I kind of like that idea, as long as you're not giving up a first round pick. Like when Diana Rossini said, like, oh, it's a first and a third, I'm like, yep, out. Nope, Steelers not doing that. The Steelers should not be giving up any first round pick for any wide receiver that they got to pay $30 million for, unless they are a bona fide top 5 guy.
Yeah, I think the idea of switching Pickens for Metcalf is interesting. I don't think a straight up trade would get it done. I think they'd have to give more. I understand, like the production is pretty similar. Like, to be honest, like they're but like you look at what Metcalf has around him in that Seattle offense, he's been like sharing, reps with Lockett and Smith and Jigba, and the Steelers have been basically throwing to Pickens as much as they humanly can. So like, I think it's one thing to look at the numbers and be like, oh, that trade would be balanced. Like, I'm not sure that it is. Also, like, yeah, DK Metcalf has had his moments. Certainly, he's gotten some personal fouls. He hit a teammate with a helmet in practice last year. I remember that. So like, certainly is not like beyond his own faults either. But I think he's someone who has been an established presence in the league for long enough that you feel like you're at least going to get someone that you are going to get your money back out of if you sign him to a contract extension. And I'm not sure the Steelers feel that about George Pickens right now.
Yeah, I'm curious as to what the value ends up being, like when and if a deal does happen for DK Metcalf. Just because, like I said yesterday, talking about it, Mike Florio saying he could be had for like a 3rd or 4th round pick when it's all said and done. Dan Racine saying, they're asking for a 1 and a 3. And again, them asking for it doesn't mean that that's what they end up getting. But I almost like Steelers or somebody else, I want him to be traded just so we can end up seeing what the end compensation is and compare it.
No, yeah, I think it's always, there's always varying compensations. And listen, when one of those prices go out, that's somebody putting that price out there. That's the Seahawks.
That's the what we want price.
Exactly. Like, that's the hey, and but everyone's gonna be like, okay, unless there's a line waiting to get that guy in that situation. And look, there's a bit of a line, but I think it's kind of like it's kind of like how we do concerts in Pittsburgh, where like, oh, that artist is coming to town. I might wait till the day of to buy those tickets, just to wait to see if the prices go down a little bit, instead of like, oh no, like when Taylor Swift's coming to town, everyone who's the Swifties are like, no, we're buying up everything 2 months in advance, and we're already going to have our parking set up and all of that. That's what happens when, Justin Jefferson, if he hits the market, or Jamar Chase, like that's what those type of guys would line up for. But when you're like, hey, you're that top level artist who's like, but people aren't tripping over each other to see you right away. I think that's kind of what's happening here, is that people are going to wait around. They're not going to be the suckers who get in line first and overpay. They're going to wait to see what's the bargain that I can get here.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing, and this is, whether it makes it more attractive or not to trade a player at that position right now. Chris, I want to get your thoughts on this, because we've talked about this in the past, but never picked your brain on it, is when you look at, the free agent market at the position, and there's a lot of like quality players out there, but a lot of them are older, or they're coming off an injury, or maybe both. Then you look at the draft class, and it's not as stacked at that position as it has been in past years. So to you, does that make it more attractive or less attractive to try to sell a wide receiver right now, because you could probably get more value on them, but also like, how are you fixing that hole on your own side of things with the lack of resource or lack of weapons that are out there?
I look at this as a dual opportunity, because here's the thing: if you're dumping the wide receiver, you're obviously trying to replace them, like you said. So it's kind of twofold, right? Like, you could be getting rid of them and hoping that you can get a good return. But I think what people have started to realize, even with the projection of this class, like this is not a class where the people expect to be 5 receivers picked in the top 20 like we've had in some years. This is going to be this is a class that I think that honestly the value starts to dip from like guys who can contribute right away, probably somewhere after the early part of the 3rd round, right? So I think that's where the value is. And so, but here's the other thing that I have. If I'm the NFL, and I've kind of had this take for a little bit, the value of wide receivers, I think, is a very volatile situation. If you are a top 5 wide receiver, you get the money, you getting paid, because they recognize that. But if you are just outside the top 10, people could want you, people could pay big for you, people could see a lot in you, but your market can be skewed all over the place. And so for teams, they have to decide what is the most valuable thing to them. Is it going and getting the deep ball threat guy or the speedster guy or the route or the separator guy? Or do you think that you just know more about Brandon Ayuk than everyone else does? And I think that's where people start to get too locked in on that's who this guy. I think like most of Pittsburgh over the Brandon Ayuk stuff, when that was all stuff was happening last summer, and everything I was hearing was just that, like, hey man, like there's interest there. They've made the calls, but like Steelers aren't going to like sell the farm for this. Like and like you're like, why aren't they selling the farm? And it's like because he's not all that. Like again, if that's Jamar Chase, different story. But this is a guy who hovers around the top 10, and I don't think that you should break the bank, especially when you're a rebuilding team. It'd be different if you're the Rams with Sean McVay and Matt Stafford, and you're like, this is the year, we got to do this right now. The Steelers aren't that right now, and that's why another reason why I think that they don't need to be involved in those talks.
Smitty, what did I say this time last year about the Steelers trading for Brandon Ayuk?
I don't know what I had for breakfast this morning.
I had a little bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich, which was delicious. I got so look, what the Seahawks want right now, they are not going to get right now.
Oh, things have to get ugly.
They're not going to trade him if they don't get what they want right now. Like if they want a first and a third, and the offer is a third, then they're just going to keep him. They're not going to trade him unless he makes it ugly and uncomfortable. Which, like, that's what we said about Ayuk. People talked about Ayuk at the draft last year. It never even came close to happening. Why? Because the 49ers thinking, we'll work it out. We'll figure it out. We'll keep him. We'll find a way. If you don't want to trade a guy, you're not going to trade a guy in April for less than you think he's worth. Now, you might trade a guy for less than you think he's worth if he makes you in August. But that's not going to happen now.
Right.
Like, if there's a chance of the Steelers acquiring DK Metcalf, it is the same story as what we saw last year, where things drag out until Labor Day, and then finally they're like, all right, fine, we'll trade you for a third-round pick to Pittsburgh. But, like, I don't see how the Steelers can let themselves wait that long again. Like, they already did this once. Like, that the need is so acute. I can't see them being the team to hang around until the end of the preseason with the hope that they might land him for the second year in a row. I can't see it.
We're going to watch wide receivers fall like dominoes. Chris's Mr. Krabs meme is going to do triple platinum numbers. I mean, by that time. So let's go to that, though. With Christian Kirk, who I literally 24 hours ago on this podcast said I'd be more surprised if it didn't happen. I want the caveat to be added that I assumed he was going to be released. So I really can't do anything about the Texans jumping in and deciding to trade for him. Who would be like the next guy that you think, like, so who's the next target domino to fall within all this? Who's the next guy we're going to be talking about for the Steelers and potentially the next victim of Chris's meme?
I'm gonna go with I'm going with the chalk here. I'm going with the very boring pick of Darius Slayton, the one that we've been talking about for a while. Everyone's been looking at. I think there's been a lot of links to tie him to the Steelers and to the potential of it. I don't know. Again, it all depends on what happens here with the because there could be someone else that wants to get traded tomorrow. Trey Hendrickson is on the market for the Bengals at defensive end. Mm-hmm. So like, there could be someone else tomorrow that steals the spotlight for another moment. And then we're talking about, so they trade for, I don't know, Tyreek Hill or whoever it is that is
Cortland Sutton when they don't give him a new contract. Yeah.
And Cortland Sutton, I think, should be the target because I've liked Cortland Sutton. But again, it's just there's so many options out there. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I think Cortland Sutton to me is the one that will become the next obsession because I can see that situation dragging out for a while. Darius Slayton will be signed by 12:45 on Monday, one way or the other. I can see the Cortland Sutton thing becoming a thing that we talk about every day for a month.
Yeah. Yep. Actually, Nick Faribaugh, friend of the show, was texting me about that. I guess Ben Albright was like just in a Twitter space talking about it and like confirmed that like what's gonna happen. Things are probably gonna get ugly if they don't get north of $25 million per year, and the Broncos seem reluctant to do so. So we'll see how that plays out. Chris, I want to come back to you to talk about some quarterback stuff now. We talked about the
Sure.
receiver stuff and how the quarterback position can obviously be tied in with that. What is just in general, your take in terms of the timeline here with the quarterback stuff? Obviously, if you read some of the way that this has been reported, you'd be surprised that a deal wasn't done. And a lot of fans just seem to think like the Steelers can put a pen in Justin Fields' hand and make him sign a contract right now and just force him to do so. But what has been your take in terms of the timeline here to get one of these guys signed?
I think that this has been a don't blink contest between the Steelers and the agents of Justin Fields. I think Justin Fields' agents have been like, yeah, the Jets are really interested. You might want to consider that when you give us your first offer. And the Steelers are like, buddy, you're not all, it's not like this is signing Patrick Mahomes here. Like we're, be cool about this. We got Russell Wilson lined up. We can look at other options here. And so you're going to see these little rumors continue to get floated back and forth. But I think the goal is to get to the deadline and like get to a decision. And I think Justin Fields wants to be back in Pittsburgh, but he wants to get paid to do so. Now, the Steelers, I think it's going to be the question is, how much is it that you can cough up reasonably for him? My sweet spot has been $15 million a year for a minute. If they can sign him to that, I think that's a win for both sides. It's awesome. Now, my cap is around like $20 million, because if you start paying over that, then I think you're starting to overpay. And if you're starting to overpay, it's going to limit what you can do to add a cornerback and other positions in this offseason period. I'm of the opinion that what's happening right now is that both sides are playing this game up until the deadline, and then it's going to be about who blinks first, who has the bigger need. Does Justin Fields want to just stick with the Steelers and just take this deal now, or does he want to hit free agency and then see what his value really is when the negotiations start flying?
Yeah, I mean, I think David Mulligetta is a very good agent, but does he know who he's in a staring contest with? I mean, Omar's been staring at the wide receiver market for almost a calendar year now. He ain't blinked once.
That's true. He has not blinked.
A staring contest against my guy. You're just not. It's not happening. You're not winning that. Yeah, I mean, look, I think for better or worse, the Steelers are trying to keep this price tag low. I think that's, to me, part of the quote unquote allure of going with a guy like Justin Fields, that you're not paying him. Like, there's not a lot of point in having Justin Fields be your quarterback if he is also expensive. I think Chris is in a very good place with the numbers. I don't think the Steelers are honestly anywhere near that right now, which leads me to wonder how things are getting from point A to point B. But yeah, I mean, they clearly want Fields, but not enough to pay Fields what Fields wants. I don't know. But yeah, I kind of feel like in this instance, let's say that's the range, like 15 to 20. And let's just say, I'm just not reporting this. Let's just say that right now the Steelers are like, yeah, we really want to do 10. Okay. It would have been better to do 15 Monday and be able to talk to wide receivers this week than wait until next Monday at 11:45 and get the 10 you were hoping for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know what? I didn't even send Chris the notes for what we were going to talk about on here, but like he joined. I was like, "Are you ready to go? Can you just roll with the punches?" He said, "Yeah." We jumped into it, but he literally, I have the word "sweet spot" typed in here to talk about in terms of the contracts, because not only with Justin Fields, but also with Russell Wilson. Because at what point contractually for both those guys do you reach a sweet spot before you're just like, we'll just take like the cheapest option, or like how much will Daniel Jones cost and how much worse is he going to be to allow you to just build the rest of your roster out?
Well, I think the first pivot is the Russ. I mean, I don't think Russ will be expensive either. I think Russ is in real danger of being left out of the quarterback game of, whatever you want to call it.
Report yesterday about the Raiders not pursue. So like that's a logical landing spot that we were.
So
looking at,
I think Russ is gonna take an offer that is like non-insulting, that involves him being the Steelers starting quarterback. So like, I don't think that they really have to worry about that too much. But I do think there's that, like, where do you like how? Yeah, they prefer Justin Fields, but like how much? Like 5 million more, 10 million? Like where? 2 years, 3 years, like versus a 1 year deal? Like what? Like how much do they really? And so I think that's very questionable.
Yeah.
Chris, what do you think about in terms of I think that last part is really what I want to hone in on there within that is like, at what point do you just say we're not paying either of these guys? Like, what does the price tag have to be to not want to do that? Again, like I agree with Alan. I don't think it's going to be anywhere close. Like I saw a number floated out there for Russ that it was like 2 years, 50 million or something like that. And I'm like, is that even within the realm possibility? Because if we talked about him getting left out of the QB game,
I can't see 25 a year being the price for either of these guys. Like, I just like, especially like it would be different, right? If at the end of the season, Russell Wilson was lighting it up and the Steelers were scoring 30 points a game in those last 5 losses, but they were giving up 50. And then it was just like, oh man, like that's the problem. Then you can see it, but they didn't score more than 17 points for 5 straight games at the end of the season. Like if Russell, as soon as Russell Wilson's people come to the table, I'm laying that out there for is like, look, you know, we like you. You're part of some good things, but clearly you can't overcome a struggling offensive line, which is what we're trying to fix, which is why, and we also have these other issues, which is why we can afford to pay you this number that we have here, but you are clearly not the $25 to $30 million a year quarterback that is going to be the thing that carries us, and makes up for all those other issues because you weren't in the last 5 games of the season. But I think Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, in fact, are both quarterbacks who, when the tide is higher, they can both add to things. And that's where your value is like, look, we value as a piece of the puzzle, but not as the straw that stirs the drink.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can certainly get on board with that. I think another thing that I wanted to bring up here, and this is a question from Cliff the Dark Knight here, said, from all the reporting, it seems like most of the front office wants to run it back with Fields. Do you have a sense of who the locker room wants, though? We know Cam, TJ, Minka all FaceTime Russ to bring him into the organization, but after the last 5 games, do you think that there's maybe a change there with how they feel?
I mean, I can't say I've talked to like all 70 guys or whatever. I think the general consensus would be Fields, but I can't really say for sure.
I'm not going to say that I know how they feel. I am going to say I think that Russ is appreciated for what he did, but I think there's a sense that like they respect how Justin handled everything last year. And everyone kind of knows at the end of the season, like, listen, like you need Russell Wilson's golden retriever positivity because that's what quarterbacks are supposed to bring, right? Like when they were down 21 points to the Ravens, and he's like, "Come on, we go get the next one. We go get the next one." And then he throws some bombs and he gets them in the game for a second, But like you need that positivity from your quarterback because that's what he's supposed to bring. But there's also times where it's like, buddy, you just like you're not helping right now. And I think that's where there might be some friction as far as like, look, Russ wasn't it. And like sometimes the energy can backfire. Whereas Justin was I never saw Justin get negative. We never saw him look pouting. He took his being benched. And again, he wasn't benched. He was replaced by the guy who was the starter all along. And a lot of people misconstrue that. But he took being sat down for Russell's return very well. And he said, like, I needed to be better if I wanted to prove that I'm the guy. And he didn't. And he said that. And I think that there is an appreciation that's coming from the team. And I think that weighs into why things are the way they are right now, as far as people feeling like, you know what, maybe give that guy a chance.
Got some very minor breaking news here on the pod. Devin Duvernay, released by the Jacksonville Jaguars, a 2-time Pro Bowl kick returner when he was with the Baltimore Ravens. Didn't do very much at all in Jacksonville last year, but
I would say the breaking news is that he was in Jacksonville last year.
Yeah, right. 25.1 yards per return last year for the Jags, which better than Cordell Patterson.
Well, yeah. Chris, speaking of friction, though, you mentioned the word friction in there. That's kind of the way that I'm looking at it. Like, more so than the ball that was played down the stretch, I really think that there's just a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths with the reporting that came from your colleague at the Post-Gazette, from Jerry Dulac, in terms of what happened down the stretch. And that's to me where I'm just like, you got to cut ties. And it's why, to me, it's so wild that it's very possible that Russell Wilson is back in the fold, just from the things that I've heard from people.
Yeah, look, And I think that's the thing is that when rumors start to fly, people start to be like, where are the rumors coming from? And when you and people don't like that when the rumors come out and they're favoring one guy, and I think that there's certainly questions there. So I'm not going to say that it's completely ruined the position of for Russell Wilson, but I do think that it has not helped his situation. I do think that there's people that talk in the organization that are just like, man, why is that out there? Why are people even talking about that? Come on, Russ. And sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's his agent, and his agent's acting on his own behalf, on their own behalf, thinking that that's what they're doing. But for me, yeah, I think again, it's just a lot of things that you're looking at. What happens in the background. There's a lot of people that hear things, and it just kind of jolts the locker room in one direction or the other.
I think the other part of this too is like the Steelers have a pretty young offense, and like the team overall is one of the older teams in the NFL actually, but like almost all the veterans were on defense except for Russ. And so like just from like who do I feel like guys like bonded with this year? I mean, Russ is like 15 years older than some of his teammates. Like they're not buddies,
Right.
like that's more like unk, right? Like that's not, like they're not going out drinking with Russ. Okay. So like, I feel like if you ask the offensive players who are all overwhelmingly closer in age to Justin Fields, I think more of them would just say, just had formed more of a connection with him sort of naturally over the course of the year.
Yeah, Justin's their dog, Russ is their unk. That was a good way of putting it.
There you go.
Unk status. Alan, anything else to put a bow on this?
No, I think we're good.
Cool. I'm glad that we were able to have Chris on here and not go like 50 minutes. Like nice tidy episode of the afternoon drive. We got to our destination pretty quickly. Chris, before we get out of here, of course, tell the people they can find you.
Absolutely. You can read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. You can find me here. You can find me on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube of the Locked On Steelers podcast, as well as the North Shore Drive podcast. Y'all know where to find me. I'm everywhere. You can also follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the social medias. Same handle every time at Carter Critiques. And also catch me on Channel 11 sometimes with our good friend Alan.
And Alan, other than there, tell people
you can find me at @Saunders_PGH on X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. PGH Steelers Now sites account SteelersNow.com. Go there, read the words so I can get paid. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications here on the YouTube platform as we continue to just we're going, man. The combine videos, people have been liking them up to 15,100 and Trey Essex subscribers. And there you go.
You know what? Just because people have floated out the idea of a reunion, I'm going Javon Hargrave.
There you go.
79. Chris, it never gets old, by the way, when I have to go through the comments here and everybody's like, love the podcast. You guys are right up there with Locked On. Like, can you just say that you like this podcast without including him in? Just say that you like ours. We don't need to know who the 1 and 2 are.
Yeah, I appreciate, but I appreciate. But hey, I tell people all the time, like, look, when people come, the reason I have people on my show is because I trust them and they do great work. And Alan does that. Smitty, you do that. I think that this is you guys do a great job here. I do check you guys just to make sure, like, hey, I'm not slipping on nothing over on my end. So if you're watching this show and you're thinking, oh, they are, and I have a ton of respect for this show. It's why I appear on this show.
Thank you for saying that, Chris.
And we're able to have you on without even obnoxiously teasing it this time, which is a first for us, actually, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we appreciate the compliments. Checks in the mail. But you can find me everywhere, Zachary Smith, PGH. As Alan said, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Here, hit us with some questions in the comments, of course. We'll work through those as we go through the offseason here, as well as any topics you want discussed. And if you're listening somewhere else, Apple, Spotify, wherever your podcast from, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe over there. Thanks again for Chris Carter for joining. For Alan Saunders, Zachary Smith, it's been Steelers Afternoon Drive. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.